Chapter 7. The Paradoxical Response in the Plot for False Independence. "Mom, don't you get it?" said the sister of an underachieving older brother. "Luke's problems are all about control. You try to control him to do his homework, and he controls you by not doing it. Despite the best of intentions, you are making things worse for your son. Through a series of false assumptions and reflexive behaviors, you have become the unwitting foil to his success. You have fallen into a blind trap that I call the paradoxical response. This trap is hidden by a series of false assumptions about your son, assumptions that by now I have hopefully dispelled, namely, your son is cognitively and emotionally ready to take on all that is thrown his way. Your son is not working up to his potential. Your son does not care about school. Your son is lazy. Based on these assumptions, you have engaged in superhuman acts to become the engine of his motivation. You've bought into the misguided idea that with enough oversight, tutoring, and coaching, you can commandeer his natural course of development. Now, however, you have made a paradigm shift and can see the previously invisible obstacles that have thwarted your best efforts. Your son is still in the throes of emotional and cognitive development. The part of your son's brain that is most needed to meet the challenges of high school, the prefrontal cortex, will not be fully wired and insulated until he is 26 years old. Your son is in the midst of separating, which means he will rebuke any attempts you make to parent him, even though he still needs lots of guidance and oversight. His preoccupation with being manly makes him too cool for school and too proud to ask for help. The paradoxical response. Now let me pull you out of this blind trap. The paradox is that the harder you try to motivate your son, the more unmotivated he becomes. At face value, this sounds like he's just being obstinate. However, there is more going on here, and it begins with ambivalence. In Chapter 1, you use the ruler exercise to learn that Mr. Bare Minimum is not apathetic about his grades. Rather, he is ambivalent about trying harder. In Chapter 2, you were introduced to the bridge of ambivalence. Crossing it means your son is leaving the dependency of childhood and becoming a self-reliant adult. In Chapter 5, your grasp on this conflict tightened when you understood that experiencing dependency not only makes a teenage boy feel like a child, but also threatens the masculine identity he's carefully been honing. Your son feigns disinterest to further stonewall you, so you draw the obvious conclusion that he does not care. However, this is not just his struggle. You have a very large stake in the outcome. Time is running out. There are only a few years left before he will have to fend for himself. Based on the current state of affairs, you fear disaster looms. However, all of your worrying is backfiring. You wish your son was at least conscious of his stagnancy. I know I had to do my work, but it is so boring and the new Call of Duty just came out. But if I don't bring up my grades, I won't get into a good college. But my paper is going to suck. Maybe he is, but if so, he's not telling you. Instead, your conversations are curt and unsatisfying. You, do your work. Your son, leave me alone. What should be an internal struggle between your son's conscious ambition and work ethic on one side and his anxiety, dependence, and self-indulgence on the other becomes a fight against you. That is how ambivalence works. Let's do a little experiment to make this clearer. Ambivalence takes turns. First, think of a difficult, life-changing decision you had to make by yourself. Which college to attend, whether or not to take a job, whether or not to take a relationship forward. Do you remember going back and forth in your mind, weighing the pros and cons, and feeling that you had absolutely made a decision, only to change your mind an hour later? Now think of another life-changing decision you had to make with someone else. Deciding whether or not to have children is a good one. Was there a time when you felt ready to become a parent, but your spouse did not? Did you change positions? As soon as your spouse said, "Let's do it," did you get cold feet? As long as your wife or husband held up a stop sign, you were free to imagine what parenthood would be like without really weighing the consequences. However, as soon as this obstacle came down, you had to confront the reality of the decision. This volleying went back and forth until both of you could own the fear and excitement that parenthood entails. Unlike a couple considering having a child, the power struggle between you and your son doesn't switch sides. He's more than willing to unload his anxiety and self-doubt. The more upset you get, the calmer he feels, because you have unwittingly assumed the burden of worrying about his schoolwork and future, and he no longer has to. Instead, he can complain about how much you push and prod him. I cannot tell you how many times I have had a young patient say, "My parents are the problem. If they would just leave me alone and stop hiring so many tutors and therapists, I would get my work done." Teens are naturally oppositional. When you step into the trap of the paradoxical response, it's like handing your son more ammunition to justify his lackadaisical approach to school. One teen patient put it bluntly, "I did not improve my grades because my father was constantly on my case. In fact, all that made me want to do was not do well in school. I learned to work ahead and stop waiting until the last minute on my own, not because he kept telling me to do it." Something else is happening here as well. Your son thinks that by rejecting your efforts and rebelling against everything he's been asked to do, he's the one calling the shots. He has given himself an unearned promotion from the apprentice to the master stage of executive functioning. Unfortunately, he's really just engaging you in a vicious power struggle that ensures your continued over-involvement in his life. Primarily, he is waging an ingenious plot to postpone adulthood in favor of a prolonged, hidden dependence on you. Because he fools himself into thinking that disavowal of academic success is actually autonomy, I call this the plot of false independence. Done either on the down low or with much fanfare by opting out, he gets you to do all the worrying for him. Though he may outwardly protest your constant surveillance and participation, he's actually forcing you to become even more engaged in his life. Take Zach, a patient I met several years ago when he was a senior in high school. He had an interesting hobby for a teenage boy, especially in this age of video games and computers. Zach loved to build boats. A curiosity about all things buoyant began when he was a toddler in the bathtub. As Zach grew bigger, so did the size of objects he attempted to make seaworthy. On family vacations at a lake in New Hampshire, Zach would spend hours stringing together pieces of styrofoam, wood, and anything else he could fashion into a boat. Eventually, Zach befriended a real boat builder who began teaching him the trade. By the time Zach came to see me, half of his family's garage was surrendered to his latest project, a 16-foot sailboat. There was nothing wrong with Zach's building a boat from a kit, except that in order to do so, he'd given up his schoolwork. Studying never came easily to him because he had both attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and a mild learning disability. He once said to me, "Having a learning disability is like running a race, but everyone is running and you are jumping hurdles." During elementary school, Zach did not resist his parents' help. However, as an adolescent, he grew resentful and began to reject their assistance. In therapy, Zach complained bitterly about his parents' overbearing control, and he schemed ways to move to New Hampshire to build boats. But the reality was that Zach's school failure only deepened his dependency on mom and dad. Although Zach was very bright, his refusal to do schoolwork ensured rejection from any four-year college in the country. Each night, as his school books remained exactly where he dropped them that afternoon, Zach headed to the garage to work on his boat. His parents stood by, feeling frustrated and helpless as Zach seemed oblivious to the fact that children were supposed to grow up, get an education, and prepare for adulthood. Although they supported Zach's boat building, a college education was non-negotiable to them. Unsure what to do, they cracked down harder, forcing him to go to the library every day after school, checking his work every night, and speaking frequently to his teachers. One day, Zach told me, "I don't care about my grades if what I'm doing does not make me happy." Things came to a head one morning when Zach refused to go to school. He did this, I learned, in one of our sessions because he couldn't find his shoes, missed his ride, and it was all too much to deal with. As Zach told it, the day before, he had come home in a fine mood because he had made significant progress at the library on a research project. Later that evening, his mother lost her temper about the mess in the house. She began throwing everything Zach had not put away, including his shoes, into the garbage bags and moved them into the garage. Zach felt that he could not win. Even when he did his homework, he was yelled at for not cleaning up his things. Here's the conversation that Zach and I had. Dr. Price, so why didn't you go to school? Zach, I just didn't have the energy to find my shoes. I did not want to make the effort. Dr. Price, do you think missing one day of school was enough punishment? Zach, what do you mean? Dr. Price, maybe a fair punishment for what your mother did to you would be to miss the whole week from school. Zach, well, I couldn't do that. I'd fall too far behind, but I wasn't punishing my mother. Dr. Price, no? How do you think she feels when you miss school? Zach, angry? Frustrated? I don't want to give her the satisfaction of doing well in school. Dr. Price, sounds like a punishment to me. Zach, well, what did you expect? I go to the library, I prepare for tests, and then I have to put up with this. Dr. Price, sometimes punishment is used to change someone's behavior, and sometimes it is used to exact revenge. You managed to make your mother feel as bad as you did. Zach, well, what am I supposed to do? She has all the authority. Dr. Price, you found an ingenious way to get back at your parents. Zach did not yell, "Screw you," to his parents. He whispered it. They had unwittingly elicited the paradoxical response. The more they pushed, the angrier he got, and the less he did. By getting so involved, they made themselves the target of his anger. This fight became a distraction from the real issue that was preventing Zach from getting his schoolwork done. Just calling him unmotivated does not go far enough. Once the adolescent's true feelings of ambivalence are unmasked and no longer camouflaged behind a power struggle, we can better understand what's going on. Motivation isn't one simple thing that your son lacks. Think of it more in terms of a big, overstuffed suitcase. In order for it to be useful, it must be unpacked. As long as the paradoxical response is in effect, nothing can change. That is why it's useless to work on teen motivation without taking your parent-child relationship into account. When you and your teen are embroiled in conflict, you cannot engage in problem solving, especially if the conflict itself is one of the main engines that keeps him comfortably locked in a relationship that allows him to offload any and all responsibility. Simply stated, the danger of being the heavy with an opt-out is that you remain the driving force. Your son never gets the chance to develop his own internal well of motivation, which is ultimately the goal. Now it's time to change your own behavior. It's time to step out of the way. My plan will only work if you stop worrying about your son's grades more than he does. We'll begin by plotting a new way forward, one that will put the conflict back where it belongs. Before you turn the page, however, let me tell you what happened to Zach. Zach graduated from high school and wisely took a gap year. He attended a program abroad that allowed him to live semi-independently and attend school. The next year, his freshman year in college, back in the United States, did not go well. Zach had trouble keeping up with his coursework, failed to complete a few papers, and was placed on academic probation. He chose to take a year off, took classes at a local college, and resumed therapy. That year, Zach worked on becoming more independent, which largely included learning to believe in himself as a student. It was not until he was 20 years old that Zach realized that fighting with his parents was actually a way of remaining dependent on them. A year of failure taught Zach that he had to chase his own happiness and not let his parents do it for him. Independence did not come easily. Even when he was a college student, Zach's parents would question the dean regularly about his grades. Zach did graduate from college, and he's now working toward a graduate degree in special education. Zach's path has contained a few more hurdles than those of his peers, but now, at age 25, he's finally learned how to jump them.